Meanwhile, Americans spent more on taxes last year than food, clothes, and health care combined. David Stockman is here on that. David, of course, the former Reagan budget director. He's been a big critic of all this spending going on in Washington. We are going to address that. But, David, you know, when Americans' overall personal books are weighed down by this kind of spending, it's hard to think how they'll ever make things right themselves. What do you think of it?
Well, I think you're right. $18,000 a family is a pretty, hefty burden. But really, I'm sad to say you haven't seen nothing yet, because we're heading into a horrendous fiscal crisis in the 2020s, and we're going to have a choice in the upcoming election between the biggest spender to inhabit the Oval Office in the last 50 years and Elizabeth Warren, who's even worse. So, this is a pretty dire outlook. We've been sleepwalking, really, for the last 2 or 3 decades. The Fed has enabled the politicians to essentially escape fiscal responsibility entirely, to sort of go on budgetary vacation, because it's bought up such massive amounts of debt, trillions of dollars. That's monetizing the debt. That drove down the interest rate. It's, 1.6% on the 10-year today. So nobody in Washington thinks there's any problem with the $22 trillion national debt. But let me tell you what's happening. This thing is careening out of control at a rate that's being totally ignored by the mainstream press and by Wall Street. Here's the number. In the last 90 days, the net debt of the federal government is up by $600 billion. In 90 days, $600 billion, not a year, not a presidential term, in 90 days. That's how out of control this thing is. Trump has increased his 4 budgets. I'm talking about spending now. I'm not even going after the tax cut that didn't work. It was a bust. I'm talking about spending. $185 billion per year in the 4 budgets that he's put into place. If you put the same dollars of purchasing power, that is 2019 dollars, the numbers for Bill Clinton are $40 billion a year in his budgets. For Obama, it was $75 billion a year in his 8 budgets. For Bush the Younger, it was $120 billion a year. So Trump is just in a league all of his own.
All right, now it takes 2 to tango, though. It takes 2 to tango, as you know, and many will quibble with you about whether the tax cuts were a waste of time. I mean, many will say we wouldn't have gotten the oomph that we did get for the economy without them. Leaving that aside,
we could
argue, but if you don't mind, I do want to push on what you were saying about debt. I mean, you're not a fan of this president and the debt he's racked up. You're convinced, though, that Elizabeth Warren would be even worse. Why is that?
Well, obviously, Medicare for all. I mean, there's all kinds of estimates around, but they tend to center around $30 trillion over 10 years. Call it $3 trillion a year. Where are you going to get the money? She's going to cancel all or 90% of the student debt. Newsflash, the budgets in future years assume the $1.6 trillion of student debt outstanding is going to be paid back, because it's all basically today loans from Uncle Sam. She's going to cancel all that. The Green New Deal, I can't even begin to put a number on that. So
you don't think all of her ideas, like a wealth tax, a Wall Street tax, a higher tax on, guys like you for just walking around, you don't think that will cover it, right?
No, but she's on to something there, and that's why I think, they're sleepwalking on Wall Street. What's happened in the last week is that the House Democrats threw Biden under the bus with this crazy Ukrainian thing. And then yesterday, Bernie had his emergency, and he basically stented Elizabeth Warren into the nomination.
Well, you could flip that around. You could flip that around. A lot of people say she's unelectable. I think that's always risky to do. They said the same about Donald Trump and all that. So they said the same about Barack Obama. So I'm careful of those sort of those. But what I'm asking you is, if that were the case, she emerges as the likely nominee. There are many on the street says, well, that's good, because there's no way in heck she'll win. What do you think of that?
I think the street is engaging in wishful thinking. She's onto something with this wealth tax. Here's why. When the Democrats used to go for soak the rich, raising the income tax, they forget that 170 million people file income tax, 96 million actually pay, and even though they say we're only going to raise the top rate, it scares the hell out of tens of millions of voters, and the Republican machine does a good job of increasing the fear level. Now, let's look at the wealth tax. There are only 83,000 families in America with more than 50 million in net worth, and there's only 600 billionaires, despite everything you read. So in terms of politics, she is onto something. I think that is going to be a help to her electability.
Yeah,
I'm totally
I don't think you
against
can
it,
dismiss
obviously.
what she's saying, and then people are doing that to their own hazard. So we'll watch what happens.
Yes.
David Stockman, good seeing you again, my friend.
Very good.